So today we're going to talk about quote incorporation, how to use quotes and integrate them into your own writing. Okay, so today's goals, we have two simple goals: how to select quotes, number one, and number two, how to incorporate quotes. To incorporate quotes, we'll use what's called a signal phrase. And a signal phrase in our class, we'll talk about three aspects of a signal phrase: the author, the context, and the manner in which the quote is said. So, selecting quotes. We got to think about, when do we quote versus when do we paraphrase? All right. We don't just randomly decide, well, in this paragraph, I'm going to quote. And I quoted in last paragraph, so this paragraph I'm going to paraphrase. When we quote and when we paraphrase, it's not just a flipping of the coin. It is actually a thought process. Okay. So just real quick, the definitions of paraphrase. Paraphrase is someone else's ideas in your own words. All right. And you do this when the idea is the most important. A quote is someone else's ideas and it's in that person's own words. All right. And in this case, the wording adds to the meaning. All right. So when we quote when the words actually matter, when it's said in a unique way, where we can analyze the specific language stated by an outside source. All right. And we paraphrase when just the idea matters. And it doesn't matter how it was said. And the meaning of what is said is not lost or lessened because we change the words. Okay. So if just the idea matters, we paraphrase. If the wording specifically matters, then we quote. And if we quote and the wording matters, that means we need to actually talk about the wording after the quote in our explanation section of our paragraph. All right. What do we quote? We quote passages that support our own argument. We're not just trying to summarize the outside source. We're trying to prove our own individual separate argument by using evidence from outside sources. All right. So it's important to remember that citations are meant to support our main point, meaning you must be able to differentiate between your argument and the source's arguments. So if you find yourself thinking, I agree with every single point of this outside source, that's going to be a problem, because then your essay doesn't become an argument. It becomes a summary of an outside source. So there should be a way to differentiate your opinion from someone else or an outside source's opinion. So how much quote is too much? When we quote, we read a 20-page article, we can't quote 20 pages, right? How many lines are we allowed to quote? I would say one significant quote per paragraph. And when I say significant quote, what I mean by that is at least a sentence or a line. If we quote single words, I wouldn't call that a significant quote. So you can do that more often in a paragraph. In terms of formatting, quotes should be no longer than 3 lines long. If they're longer than 3 lines, you have to format them differently. And I would recommend not doing that in this class, because we want your essays to be based on your argument and not your partner's, or not your outside source's argument. All right. A good rule of thumb is that for every line of quote that you cite, you need to have at least 1 line of analysis. So that means if you have 3 lines of quote, that quote must be very important and you must have a lot to say about it. And note at the bottom of this slide, it says these are guidelines and there are exceptions. I've read great essays where they use more than 1 significant quote per paragraph. And I've seen some great essays where they have 3 lines of quote and just 1 line of analysis, but somewhere in their essay, they'll have 1 line of quote and 8 lines of analysis. All right, these are just guidelines, and it can always change. The idea, though, is with the one significant quote per paragraph, again, it's just to foreground your opinion and your argument and not to allow outside sources to take control over your essay. All right, so this goes to incorporating quotes. Don't drop your quotes, and we'll talk about the term dropping quotes. In English classes, you should never drop quotes. I've been in journalism classes, and you actually want to drop quotes. But in English classes, in history classes, in education classes, for the most part, you always want to incorporate. And so here's an example of dropping a quote. It's starting and ending a sentence with a quote. There's the example right here. Notice the sentence starts, men are still basically scum, and it ends after scum, and it starts right at men. So that last sentence in this example is all quote. Men are still basically scum. That's all quote. That's a problem. That's called dropping in a quote. And the way to solve that is to use a signal phrase. All right. Provide your reader with a signal phrase. A signal phrase is your language prior to the quote. There are three aspects of a signal phrase: who says the quote and why that person is relevant, the quote's context, and the manner in which the quote is said. Here's an example. When discussing how men perform in domestic roles, Dave Barry, a nationally syndicated columnist, claims men are still basically scum. See, in this example, you can see that the first section, when discussing how men perform in domestic roles, that's the context. So that's number 2 in terms of aspects of a signal phrase. The quote's context is the first section of that sentence. When discussing how men perform in their domestic roles, what that does is it allows us to better understand what the quote is saying. So the quote says men are still basically scum. And if I just had the quote, well, I would think that they're scum regarding everything, when in fact, they're just scum, according to Dave Barry, when it comes to domestic roles. And so the context matters, and it helps kind of funnel the reader into the exact meaning of the quote. Second, you see Dave Barry. So that's who says the quote. But not only that, it's why that person is relevant. So it says Dave Barry, a nationally syndicated columnist. Just to say Dave Barry claims, that doesn't do me any good, because I might not know who Dave Barry is. And when you do outside research, your reader might not know who a source that you have, who that person actually is. Okay? So you can't just say Dave Barry. You need to tell me why I should listen to them. All right? Why is this person credible? Why is this person a good person to support your argument? Okay? And then the last aspect of a signal phrase is the manner, and that's just simply claims, the word claims. All right? This means more if you do an interview and he says something sarcastically or ironically, but it's good to have in there. All right? So the manner, the quote's context, and who says the quote. And that example has it all. You're going to want to use the quote as evidence to prove your paragraph's point.